there, and welcome Virtual Space Hero community. It is a very hot afternoon here in Valencia, Spain, and I'm super excited to discuss a hot topic with you. And I have a tremendous expert again on my Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Live. So very much looking forward to today's conversation and discussion. Let us also know what your questions are. You know that at Virtual Space Hero, we love to get your questions, your comments, so we can also tailor our topics, our discussions to your needs. So use the chat function here on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or on Facebook, whatever platform you're joining from, and give us something to talk about. But before we start, I'm really super excited to introduce my guest to you. I have been following her for quite some time on LinkedIn. I discovered her through Lisette Sutherland's podcast collaboration, Superpower, which I'm a huge fan of. And when I started following her on LinkedIn, I found such valuable insights on-camera presence. And it is because she's coming from broadcasting with a huge background. She comes from broadcasting, was training C-level executives, and of course from last year onwards, she was training the whole companies, because we know that on video presence became much more important for everyone, not only for the C-suite. And with that, I'm super happy to welcome here on my stage with me, Karin Reed, connecting immediately. Here she is.
Hey, Barbara, it's so great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Hi there, Karin. Thanks so much for accepting my invitation. And I know summertime is holiday time. Some people have a more busy calendar, some people are on holiday, so it's either busy. And therefore, thank you very much for making time and accepting my invitation to join us here.
You bet.
Karin, I already talked a little bit about your background. So coming from broadcasting news, tell us a little bit more about what you were working on. How did you transition from that broadcasting section to training and business communication?
It's definitely been an interesting journey, Barbara, for sure. So I began my early career as a broadcast journalist. I worked primarily for NBC, which was based here in the States. And won an Emmy along the way, interviewed luminaries like Muhammad Ali. Then I left the business in 2004 to apply my skills in the corporate world. And what I found is that I would be often hired as the professional on-camera spokesperson, but then they were bringing people in more and more often from the corner office or the corner cubicle to appear on camera alongside of me and expect them to perform at the same level of skill. That often did not work out so well. So I recognized a business opportunity to teach people who never imagined they'd have to be good on-camera communicators how to be just that. And that's how SpeakerDynamics, my company, was born. Now, that was a decade ago. And you can imagine that today, all those on-camera communication skills are more relevant than ever. And as you mentioned, I went from training the executive leadership team that might have been like the de facto spokespeople to training everyone. So it's been quite an experience being in this seat. I've been a video evangelist for so many years, and seeing people embrace it wholeheartedly and rapidly has been really, eye-popping.
I truly can imagine that. I remember that Lisette in one of her podcasts, I think she was saying she had to hire an additional assistant to sort of be able to answer all the requests she was getting 2020. I imagine also for you, 2020 has been a huge year, yeah, right?
Absolutely, because I really had my business triple in the month of March of 2020 alone, and it forced me to scale. And what I also found is, you can train the executive leadership team of 20 people in workshop form. You can't train 800 sales reps in that form. So I needed to create some sort of online platform that would scale. So that's also led to the creation of SpeakerDynamics University, which is a self-paced online training system that has really done quite well in the marketplace. And people are finding that to be a great resource as everybody's trying to figure out how to navigate this on-camera communication.
Yeah, totally. And I had a look at your SpeakerDynamics University. It looks fantastic. So everybody who's listening, definitely check out SpeakerDynamics.com. It's not only the university that is with a huge and a very interesting offer there, but also Karin's blog with valuable insights and tips when it comes to on-camera presence and how to use video, right?
Absolutely. We try to put as much content out there as possible so people can find the answers that they're craving, because being able to communicate through a camera requires a very different skill set than the one required to talk to an audience face to face. And so everybody's tried to figure this out on their own, but this is something we've been teaching for a long time. So being able to give people these tools is really kind of gratifying at this moment in time.
And also, honestly, from my side, I've been looking for so many years as a researcher. You are very much a self-directed learner, because there are not so many courses, but you as a researcher at some point can do. But honestly, sometimes it's just worthwhile investing in a university course, for example, at SpeakerDynamics, rather than gathering all the free content, bits and bytes out there and trying to sort of put it together for you that makes it so that it makes sense.
Yeah,
fantastic. Absolutely. So definitely go there, speakerdynamics.com. Today, we're going to talk about virtual presentations. And myself, I've been working as a virtual facilitator and virtual team leader as well for many years. So I'm very much looking forward to also getting your insights on that. And I recall that I read an interesting blog article that you also talk about the right mental mindset on camera. What would that be, right mental mindset, Karin?
So the one thing that people often don't quite understand is the kind of presentation that you're doing when you're on camera. So rather than feeling like you are presenting in front of, a room full of people and standing up on stage or behind a podium, no matter how many people are in your audience in a virtual presentation, they all feel like you are talking just to them. So it should always be an audience of one in your mind. So, consider it more of a conversation that you're having with somebody just a couple of feet away, because you're actually pretty close to your conversation partner. You are as close to them as your eyes to your webcam and their screen to their eyes. And so with that in mind, you have to understand the boundaries of that intimate conversation. You don't want to go into presenter mode where you're projecting your voice and you're doing big gestures. No, instead, you want to keep it in this conversational space where you can just impart information as you would with somebody across the desk from you or across the dinner table. It's easier to do that if you are, for example, in like a Zoom meeting where you have one person here and one person here. It is harder to do when you are doing a virtual presentation and you're perhaps sharing your slides. And sometimes you can see your audience and sometimes they're just in one little box in the corner. So what I recommend doing is visualizing your viewer, thinking about one person who is a representative of that audience, and talk to them. And how do you reach them? Through the camera. The camera is the conduit to your conversation partner. It is not just an inanimate object. That is your portal to your people. And so you need to pour your energy and your focus through the camera lens.
And I think it's very interesting because so many people are always, and that's why I also find it intriguing to talk about the mindset, because so many people underestimate how important this mindset of the camera lens is, right?
It affects everything. It affects how you present vocally. It affects how you present physically. And what I do see sometimes is people maybe have heard, okay, I'm supposed to be looking at the camera. But rather than just looking at the camera as you would naturally with somebody's face, where you're breaking gaze perhaps, and you're looking off to the side as you're thinking about what you're saying, people will almost stare into the camera and look like they're being held captive, which is not a good effect. So I would just suggest to you, always think that that camera is representing a person's face and interact with it the way you would with a person's face. And you pour your energy that way, but you don't stare at them because that's going to make them feel uncomfortable. The problem is you don't have those social cues that are given back to you by the camera lens saying, you're boring a hole in my brain.
And it's fun. I was just thinking, how do you do that then? Because I heard many trainers, they are using like really a real-time picture behind the camera or on the wall, rather behind, like indeed even looking over the camera to have a picture there somewhere. Does that really help, or may it be more disturbing?
Well, here's the challenge. If you are even so subtly looking away from the camera lens, that can be picked up by your audience. So for example, if you have a picture of somebody just slightly above, like if I'm looking slightly above my camera, hopefully I'm demonstrating it for you. Does it look like I'm looking at you? Probably not. It looks like I'm looking above, right? The same holds true if you're looking to the side of the camera. It looks like just something is slightly off. So a change in eye line is very dramatic on camera. And so what I would suggest is, use that picture as a reminder, like make it small, put it beside your camera lens, but you don't want to be looking at that picture the entire time because people will detect that you're not indeed making eye contact with the camera.
Okay, very good. So I think what is interesting is the way that you were describing it, that people start staring at the camera lens. So really trying to make it as natural as possible, looking also somewhere else while I'm talking, and then coming back to the camera lens would be necessary to sort of fake a real connection there, or a face-to-face connection setting to some extent.
Absolutely. And it's also important to note that when other people are talking, it's not really necessary for you to be staring into the camera because you want to be able to read their body language. So when you're talking, Barbara, I'm going to be looking at you and seeing what you are doing with your facial expressions, because the way we communicate is not just with our words, not just with our tone of voice, it's with our whole bodies. So if you're trying to gather a full picture of what that message is, you need to be able to take it all in. So if somebody is speaking, then I'm looking at them and I'm reading their body language. When I'm speaking, I'm trying to impart my message in full by, using my body to help communicate it. But understanding that for them to receive it as powerfully as possible, and for me to appear as confident as possible, I need to be primarily looking into the camera lens.
That is a fantastic tip. I think what I usually tell people, I'm not sure what you think about that, when I talk to trainers or when I do my trainings, my own trainings, I usually tell them that I, for example, try to maybe even stare the first 5 minutes of a training very much into the camera to have a deeper connection, and then I sort of detach more. And that's also easy because most people, they really struggle with looking into the camera lens, whether there is a picture or not. People struggle with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also challenging too if, say, for example, you're using slides and you wonder, where should I be looking? So what I suggest is always ask yourself this question: where do you want your audience to get their information? There will be times where you want them to get the information from what you're showing on the slide. Say you're talking people through a data set or whatever it is. You want to direct their attention there. So that means you guide them with your gaze. If you want them to look at the screen, you can look at the screen as well. And then talk them through what they're seeing. So give visual and verbal cues. Use your cursor to show them where on the screen they should be looking. Tell them, okay, on the right-hand side, you can see the bar that is in gray or the bar that's in pink. All of these verbal cues are really critical because you might be intimately familiar with your slide, but they are probably not. So you want to focus their attention as quickly as possible, because when you first put the slide up there, they're going to say, what am I looking at? So if you can remove that confusion quickly, that will allow them to stay on track with you, because when they're confused, they're not going to be able to listen to you.
That's a very good point. I really like that. It will help a lot also in my own facilitation. Thanks very much for that tip. Let me ask you a question. Let's move on a little bit. We talked about the camera lens, but there's of course in this tile we have a small part of our body. And I still remember the first time when I was doing my first webinar, like, I don't know, was it 6-7 years ago or something? I was reading into what should I consider when doing my first paid webinar for a big company.
Right.
And I remember still that afterwards what happened is I was trying to mimic all my gesture, because I do a lot of gesturing when I'm on a live stage. I was trying to do that into the small tile, and of course it was like making people crazy, right? So They told me afterwards, HR, great content, whatever, they loved it, but maybe I should think a little bit about what I'm doing with my hands, because apparently I was talking like that. So body language. What is it that is important for body language to consider when we only have this small tile here?
Well, you're talking about the small tile, and that truly is the big thing to consider. It's all about frame size and what your frame size allows you to do in terms of gestures, because the way you frame yourself creates distance between you and your conversation partner. So the less they can see of you, on camera. That means the less of your body, the closer you will feel to your conversation partner. So if you're like this, it's like you're a close talker, and people would likely want you to back up. But if you can imagine, if you are in this current space, this is what I would call is like between a tight and medium shot. You have room to gesture, but if you have your hands up here the entire time, that's going to be really distracting. So what I would suggest is allow yourself to use your hands, because if you are a hand talker and you try to muzzle that, that's going to have a detrimental effect on your overall communication effectiveness. But keep it perhaps a little bit lower. If it pops up into the frame periodically, that is no big deal. In fact, it'll add to your authenticity. If you are on a wider shot, meaning like say that you are framed from like waist up, that would actually be considered a medium shot. You have more room to gesture because you have more space and you're actually further away from your conversation partner. So just consider the sort of conversation space that you're creating. In my current one, we would probably be maybe 4 feet away from each other, Barbara. If I am sitting, if I have a wider shot, and I'm seen from the waist up, that'd be more like you're perhaps 10 feet away. So what gestures would be appropriate, in that environment? If you're seen from head to toe, then it's almost like you are standing way in front of the room. You can do whatever you want with your gestures. But as our shot starts to tighten, then that limits our gesturing a little bit, at least from what we want to be seen on the screen.
And for example, would you recommend, if we're giving a big presentation, a very important presentation, I also have a wide angle camera, would you rather recommend then to change a little bit? Because I, for example, I like presenting when I'm standing up, to have like a larger angle so that you are farther away and you can gesture more, or would you rather recommend to be closer like this here and to have less of the body?
I think it depends upon what the environment is. So one of the advantages of presenting this way is it is kind of intimate, and you can create some pretty deep connections in this way. So I would say consider how you can best convey your content. So as I was watching you step back, Barbara, it was funny because I'm like, okay, her audio is a little bit hollow, so I wouldn't want that to happen. But also, I felt a little bit less connected to you. So I wonder if that would impact your ability to convey your content, because people would feel it easier to check out. Here, you're pretty front and center. And I think people have been conditioned to expect this sort of framing for the most part whenever they are taking in virtual presentations. So, I probably wouldn't go any bigger than a medium shot, or else you risk possibly creating too much space between you and your audience.
Fantastic. We were talking about body language in general. We were talking about how we're using the tile. Is there something else when it comes to our hands, or when it comes to what we're doing with the shoulders, that would be like a super tip that we should consider when we are giving a presentation?
I would say the less you think about what your body is doing, the better off you are. Very honestly, you want your focus to be on the message, and if you focus on your message, I promise you, your body will follow. We don't think about what our bodies are doing when we're having conversation face to face with somebody. We're not thinking, okay, this is what I had for dinner last night. I had chicken as my entree. Now I'm going to move my right hand. And then I had chocolate torte as my dessert. Now I'm going to move my left hand. We don't do that, right? Our bodies just follow along and support organically what we are saying. So allow yourself to be loose, and your body is going to respond the way you want it to respond. What I will say is sometimes when we try to stifle some of our movements, we tend to create movement that is not helping us. So say, for example, you're seated, and it's interesting, Barbara, because I think standing is a great way to present if you receive more energy that way. But if you are seated when you present and you are in a swivel chair and you try to, for example, hold your hands tightly and not move, I can guarantee you that you're going to start to do this, because our bodies need to move, and they're going to figure out how to do it. And if they can't do it in their natural way, they're going to do it in an unnatural way, like swiveling in the chair.
Absolutely. And that's fun, because that is one thing that I always do. And I see myself and I'm like, stop it. and I continue, stop
Change your chair.
Dear God, yeah, no. And then the next thing, but the one challenge that I see was standing, and I had to work on that a little bit, or like be more conscious about myself and my body, because I'm a passionate dancer. So what I figured out when I'm standing is I immediately start doing balancing exercises with my legs. So that was at the beginning, it was like, I'm standing, okay, let's do some balancing there, left feet, right feet. And I totally drifted away from whatever I was doing.
You're having a bar class all by yourself.
Totally, mamma mia.
The other thing that happens sometimes too is people will rock back and forth,
True.
almost like a metronome. And one way to combat that is, rather than having your feet side by side, have one slightly in front of the other, because it's more difficult to rock side to side if your feet are slightly off kilter.
And this is also my classical mom's movement now, right? With the baby boy.
So true, so true. You're normally always rocking back and forth, for sure.
And it's so fun because I discover myself that I'm doing that even when I'm without my boy. And I'm like, my husband even starts like that. So what? Okay, good.
That's great.
Body language.
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. So body language, great insights, great ideas on what to consider or what less to think about, like the body, as you were saying, what I really like. So let's move on a little bit about engagement, because one thing that we do know is that last year, due to all those and many sometimes a little bit badly organized meetings and not well facilitated meetings, people started drifting away, right? And
Sure.
Engagement also dropped. So
Yes.
what are and you have a great article also on your blog about engagement. What are your suggestions when it comes to virtual presentation and how to keep your audience engaged?
Well, the challenge that we are all facing is that we are fighting a default stance of passive observer. It's how we've been conditioned to deal with screens. We watch TV, we watch a movie, but now we want people to be active participants through a screen, and that can be really, really difficult. So the key to getting people to stay engaged is making them always do something. So that can be either direct engagement, taking a poll, or it can be indirect engagement, putting out a rhetorical question that you want them to think about, putting them in the center of your content. Imagine your last whatever, and that gets them starting to think about what you're saying and gets them involved in what you are saying. The other thing, just from a practical standpoint, is making sure if you are using slides that you don't hide behind those slides. That's something that I've seen happen across the board that has really diminished the level of engagement that people have during a virtual presentation. Because people will take what I call a linear presentation approach, where you introduce yourself, you introduce your topic, you put up your slide deck for the entire time, and maybe at the end you ask if there are any questions. But that is basically allowing yourself to be a runaway train. You're focusing on getting from point A to point B, and you have not even realized that your train load of passengers all hopped off before you got to the end of your journey. So it's really important that you use your slides in a thoughtful way. So I would suggest, if you are doing virtual presentations, don't just think about the content, think about the tool that you're using. Get really savvy at being able to move in and out of sharing your screen, because you want to be able to virtually re-engage people. Because what happens is when you put a slide up, initially it helps to impart information, right? But there is a point where that slide is no longer being absorbed and it becomes a resting spot for the eyes of your audience. So the only way to break them out of that is to take the slide away and get the people back on the screen. And that automatically re-engages them. It changes their virtual environment, and then it allows you to reestablish that human connection. But moving in and out of screen share is really a critical strategy to be able to keep people tuned in.
I also think that's one of the major things that people unfortunately do, is like being always with a slide there. I'm not sure what would you suggest, whether if you have an important event, let's say, would you rather suggest, but of course it's always dependent on the people, the community, the topic, but would you rather suggest to start an event with a slide set? Think about a Zoom room, you open it up, people come in, and it will be a presentation or sort of a workshop, something, would you start it with a slide there, or would you rather have people join, and maybe if they join with video, to have the video shared and some icebreaker chat conversation, some music? Or would you say like corporate branding is so important, there needs to be a slide at the beginning?
Maybe as people are coming initially into the room before you start the actual event, I would have a title slide up just so people know that they're in the right place. But for the actual kickoff of the event, I would actually put the focus on the people. So if you have an MC, if you have somebody who is leading the event, I would not only have them on camera, I would have their spotlight video. So that means, like, for example, if you are using a Zoom room, you can actually spotlight one individual box and have that box appear large for everyone. And that allows them to, for one thing, have like the presence to be able to, greet everybody, bring them in, and it creates a certain level of gravitas to that. And so that's your opening. And then perhaps you transition to showing some slides of what's going on that day. If it's small enough, I love having some form of icebreaker. And Lisette actually had great ideas on this. She said, you think of an icebreaker as something that is, fun by nature, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It depends what the purpose is of that event. Maybe it's simply saying, what do you hope to get out of today? And that is really valuable too, especially for you as, for example, a facilitator. You want to know what people want to accomplish because you want to help them to do that. So going around the room and getting people to voice that is really important. And it also kind of sets the stage for participation throughout, because once people talk once, they're more likely to talk again and again. So you're kind of priming their participation pump in that way. So I would say use all of the tools that you have. Using visual aids is great. I was recently watching an event where they didn't have any slides at all. And I felt like that actually fell flat, because you need to actually understand that most people are visual learners. So using a visual aid helps people to be able to retain the information. So having the combination of verbal and visual is good, but you don't want to overuse the visual. And in a virtual setting, sometimes the slides are just too predominant. They take up the entire screen and it diminishes the person. And the person is the one providing value, not the slides. So in order to kind of reestablish the proper balance, you can do that by moving in and out. And sometimes you want people to get information from you. Sometimes you want them to get it from the slide that is on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very good point. Thank you so much. And if we think now about the cases that we know it happens, people are, I don't like Zoom fatigue, but I like virtual fatigue. We do know it happens because we're in so many virtual meetings. So the teams that I work with, I do suggest them to have also off-camera meetings for brainstorming or things like that, because also if they go walking, like those walking meetings, that they became very popular.
Yes.
What would you suggest should you be doing as a speaker? If you, for example, I do a lot of work with Azerbaijan, and in Azerbaijan, for example, my students, they can never ever have the camera on because of bandwidth. Me as a trainer, I do have the camera on, but what would you do if you are not able to have the camera on either? What would you more focus on?
I would focus on the chat function, because that is one thing that I also encourage people to recognize in this virtual space, that participation takes on different forms. There is the speak up and add your input form of participation, but there's also all of that great text that can come in through chat, and you can ideate on there. But what is incumbent upon the facilitator is they don't just let that chat be completely ignored. You have to actually take a look at it and weave it into the verbal discussion. So for your students in Azerbaijan, I think it'd be great to be able to encourage them to respond on chat, and then you actually give voice to what they are saying in text form, because then you're having that rich exchange of ideas, and you keep it participatory without really struggling with the bandwidth as much.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. And I think we also had one other LinkedIn Live with, for example, Cassie Labori, who is a virtual training instructor and a senior expert in the field. We were also talking about how to create more interaction also off camera. So you can also check on that Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Live or podcast section that we have already published.
Nice.
Last but not least, Karin, we had we also put one question that we are going to discuss there in the article that we published for today's LinkedIn Live, and it was about the 3 ways to create a webcam setup that wows.
Absolutely.
So, well, let's start and tell me what should I do differently in my setup. And you've seen that I've been struggling today, right? To find the angle here. I was moving around like crazy in my apartment today because of different circumstances that I'm in.
I think
let's go to that.
Well, I think that you've actually done a really great job, Barbara. So I'm not going to say, oh, it's terrible. Actually, I think you framed yourself so well. And honestly, like that is the first thing to consider. Make sure that you are utilizing your framing as much as you can by allowing yourself to be sitting high in the frame. So you want to make sure that you have a little bit of space between the top of your head and the either side of the screen, and that is equidistant between your shoulders and the edges of the screen. You can do something called the 3-finger test, where you take 3 fingers, stack them on top of your head, and that's the amount of space that you want to have between the top of your head and the top of the screen. And the reason why we do this is because we want to create a similar canvas for people to read the nonverbals that they would in person as they do virtually. So when you're talking face to face, you're not going like this and looking up and down. You're taking in their body language from about this amount of space. So you want to create that online as well. So make sure that you are framing yourself appropriately and you have your camera pointed straight back behind you. Do not have your camera angled up. If you see the ceiling in your shot or a ceiling fan in your shot, then you know your camera is pointed up. You want it straight back towards the wall behind you. Second, think about lighting. The key point in lighting is that you are using front lighting so that your face is well illuminated and evenly illuminated. The way we communicate is, in large part through our body language and through our facial expressions. And you want to make it as easy as possible for people to read your facial expressions by having your face well lit. So, for example, I would probably add a light to your setup there, Barbara, and just allow yourself to
give me a sec.
That's
and
much better.
I was thinking, I forgot the light.
Absolutely. Yes, but I think that's a great example because you see the before and after. So before, the brightest thing in the shot were your white walls, but now it diminishes the wall and puts the focus on you. So I am so excited about that. And then what I would also consider is just your audio. People are much more tolerant of poor video quality than they are of poor audio quality. And it's difficult because we don't know how we sound. We don't get feedback as we are speaking, in a virtual space, but you can bet that the people on the other side know if you sound like you're talking as if you were in a tin can. So be very mindful of what audio you are using, what audio input you are using. Oftentimes, the microphones that are embedded in laptops may not perform well if you are in a room that has a lot of hard surfaces. So if you're in a room with, a tile or hardwood floor, if you have high ceilings, if you have windows without a lot of curtains on them, that doesn't have a whole lot of sound absorbing material in your space, and it can create this kind of echoey, bouncy sound. So in order to have a more full sound, you might want to consider something else. So a lot of people have opted for the headsets because you get excellent audio fidelity. It also helps you to stay focused on the call. I use a lapel microphone that is pretty condensed and has pretty good audio quality that I've been really happy with. And it doesn't require a huge investment either. And you will find a whole bunch of options if you just, go online.
Absolutely. Fantastic suggestion. Thanks so much. What about my audio? Am I too echoey still?
Well, I like your audio, but I think you might want to check out something else, Barbara.
I need to come. It needs to come closer, right?
And that is the problem with it. So a lot of people have these speakerphone pods, but their range isn't very far. So when you hold it up like that, Barbara, it sounds great. But if
you know what the problem will be, Karin, I will start singing. If I have it like that, it feels like a microphone. I feel like on stage, and I'm not a good singer, so I definitely need to be aware of that. Dear God.
That's great. Well, I mean, it does make a big difference. And if you watch this back, Barbara, you'll hear the difference. So you just have to be mindful. But the only way to really figure out how you sound is either to record yourself and play it back, or hop on a call with a family member or a friend who's going to be candid with you.
Absolutely. And I do know already my podcast producer will be mad with me, because he always tells me, have your mics close to you, to where you're sitting, where you're speaking, because afterwards he has to do so much work on my audio if it's not good enough for the podcast, of course.
That's why I like the lapel microphone, because it is close and I don't have to think about it. It doesn't get in my way. So it works quite well.
Yeah. That's a good point. Thanks so much. Great suggestions also here. So I'll keep my mic up here. And Karin, you stop me if I start singing in the last minutes here. You stop me, right?
I promise to stop you.
Good. Let me have you, I have a last question, because we talked today about a topic that is very specific, virtual presentations. You're coming from that area, but you also wrote a book about hybrid, about virtual events for last year, I think. And this year, your book is being published with Wiley about hybrid teams, correct?
So we had Suddenly Virtual, Making Remote Meetings Work, come out in March of this year. This is actually my second book with Wiley. I wrote Oncamera Coach back in 2017. But Suddenly Virtual was written in collaboration with my co-author, Dr. Joseph Allen, who is one of the foremost meeting scientists. And so we had our two areas of expertise kind of collide. So he is a meeting scientist, on-camera communication expert. We came together because you have these virtual meetings with video at their core. So the book has done quite well. It's data-based with practical advice, and people have appreciated that. So they've appreciated it so much that Wiley asked us to write another book, which is Suddenly Hybrid, which will be coming out next year. So we're gathering the data now. We're figuring out best practices, because we really are in our second great transition when it comes to meetings. You know, we all transitioned very quickly to virtual, but now we're having to transition to hybrid. And that's going to be an evolution as we try techniques and they either work or don't work. But we have gotten to talk to some really fantastic companies that have been doing it for a while and have found success. So we're excited to bring those to our readers next year.
Fantastic. So I will definitely stay updated on when the book comes out through your webpage. I signed up for your newsletter. I'm reading through your blogs. I encourage everybody out there also to connect with Karin on LinkedIn, where everybody can find you, or through SpeakerDynamics.com, which is the webpage. And with that, Karin, it was a tremendous pleasure having you with us. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Barbara, it's been great. Thank you so much.
I really appreciated it. And you know that I have prepared a small virtual cocktail backstage, and I'm joining you there in a bit.
Sounds great.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. So I saw that there were a few comments on YouTube and on Facebook that I'm going to check afterwards. Apparently, they were not able to be loaded here on the StreamYard platform. I'm going to check the technical difficulties that happened there. Next week, we are going to stream again, and we are going to be here on the 29th, which is also a Thursday. We're going to talk to Penny Palin about creative collaboration in hybrid teams. So don't miss this out and stay tuned. Let's become a hero of the virtual space. I'm going to meet you next week here. Bye.